Just a few years ago, El Salvador was known as one of the most dangerous countries on Earth. Entire neighborhoods controlled by gangs, streets where even the police were afraid to enter. A place where violence had become part of daily life. But then, something unexpected happened. A controversial leader rose to power and launched one of the most aggressive crime crackdowns the world has ever seen. Mass arrests, mega prisons, entire criminal networks dismantled almost overnight. Some people call it a miracle. Others call it something far more dangerous. Join us, and let's discover what life in El Salvador looks like today. Let's go.
Number 1. Oscar Romero Assassination 1980. The Archbishop shot at the altar for speaking too loud. Oscar Romero was considered a safe choice when he was appointed Archbishop of San Salvador in 1977. Conservative, reserved, not the type to cause political trouble. The government and the military establishment were comfortable with him. That calculation turned out to be completely wrong. The shift began with the murder of Father Rutilio Grande, a personal friend of Romero who worked with rural farming communities. Death squads killed Grande for defending laborers' rights. Romero's response was a transformation that his contemporaries described as fundamental. Something in him broke open permanently. His weekly Sunday sermons, broadcast on the Archdiocese radio to all of El Salvador, became increasingly direct about state violence, disappearances, and torture. In March 1980, he published an open letter to President Jimmy Carter requesting the suspension of all U.S. military aid to the Salvadoran government, arguing the weapons were being used to massacre civilians. The letter was read worldwide. On March 23, 1980, during his Sunday homily, he looked directly at the camera and told Salvadoran soldiers, "Stop the repression. In the name of God, I order you, stop." 24 hours later, while celebrating Mass at a small chapel in San Salvador, a shooter entered and fired one round. Romero died instantly at the altar. The case was never fully resolved judicially, though extensive investigations point to former Major Roberto Dao Buisson as the person who ordered the killing. Romero was beatified by Pope Francis in 2015 and canonized in 2018. His face appears on murals across El Salvador, a country that murdered him and then turned him into a national saint, which is either profound irony or something closer to earned redemption, depending on how you look at it. Así es la vida en El Salvador. Criminality, prisión y un presidente que lo cambió todo.
Number 2. Santa Ana Volcano, El Salvador, hiking the most active crater with an acid lake inside. Standing at the rim of the Santa Ana volcano crater and looking down at the lake inside is one of those experiences that doesn't translate well in photographs, which is part of why the place hasn't been overrun by tourism. The lake is an intense yellow-green color that looks artificially vivid, sitting inside a crater that still vents sulfuric gases continuously. The smell hits before you see it, a sharp chemical edge in the air that the wind carries up the slope well before you reach the top. Santa Ana, also called Ilamatepec, is El Salvador's highest peak at 2,381 meters and the country's most active volcano. The trail starts in dense cloud forest, so thick that sunlight barely reaches the ground, then transitions through altitude-adapted shrubs and grasses, then into a near-lunar zone of dark volcanic rock with steam escaping from fissures underfoot. The entire climb is a compressed geology lesson, moving upward through distinct ecosystems. The last eruption was in 2005, violent enough to throw boulders that killed 2 people and force evacuations from nearby communities. The volcano remains monitored, and the trail opens and closes based on seismic activity. That unpredictability is part of the experience. You book the hike knowing it might be called off, which means every summit carries the particular satisfaction of something that almost didn't happen. The view from the rim on a clear day covers the Coatepec crater lake below, the city of Santa Ana, and on exceptional days the Pacific coastline on the horizon. 3 distinct environments, Crater Acid Lake, Volcanic Highlands, and Pacific Coast, visible simultaneously from one spot. It's the kind of geography that makes you wonder why El Salvador doesn't appear in more conversations about the world's most dramatic natural landscapes.
I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you a naturally curious person? If you're watching, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. This space is made for people like us. To ensure you're always part of this community and receive all our latest discoveries, you just need to do one thing: subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected with us. Okay, now that you're part of our Legion of the Curious, let's move on to the next item.
Number 3. El Salvador Surfing Olympics 2024 Paris. How a gang-plagued country made it to the biggest stage. When Brian Perez competed in surfing at the Paris 2024 Olympics, with the competition held at Tiahupu in Tahiti, arguably the most powerful wave on the planet, he represented a country that had spent decades with its own beaches partially inaccessible due to gang violence. The path from El Salvador's Pacific coast to an Olympic podium is the kind of story that requires understanding where the starting point actually was. El Salvador's coastline has world-class surf conditions that were largely invisible to the international competitive circuit during the worst years of gang control. Competitions avoided the country for security reasons. Athletes who developed serious skills locally had almost no pathway to international competition. The infrastructure that connects a talented surfer to a qualifying event to an Olympic spot simply didn't exist in functioning form. The security transformation changed the calculus concretely. International surf federations began treating El Salvador as a viable competition venue. ISA-sanctioned events that generate Olympic qualification points started including Salvadoran stops. The chain linking local talent to international exposure became operational in ways it hadn't been before, and the athletes who had been developing skills on those Pacific breaks for years now had somewhere to go with them. The social dimension runs parallel. Organizations working in coastal communities around El Tunco, El Mahawal, and Playa Sanzal have developed surf programs specifically targeting youth from low-income backgrounds, using the sport as structured occupation and community building. Kids who would have had no access to the sport without these programs have entered competitive circuits at ages where development is still possible. El Salvador's appearance at the Olympics in surf wasn't an accident of geography. It was the result of a specific window opening at a specific time, and people ready to go through it.
Number 4. El Tunco Beach, El Salvador. Why professional surfers keep coming back to this black sand beach. El Tunco is 44 kilometers from San Salvador and sits at an elevation of approximately 0. It's a beach town on the Pacific coast, built almost entirely around one activity. The black volcanic sand, which surprises first-time visitors who expected white, is the immediate visual signature of the place. The waves are the reason everyone comes back. The surf conditions at El Tunco work because of a specific combination of geography. The rocky reef bottom creates consistent peak formation. The Pacific swells that arrive from the open ocean hit the bay at angles that generate rideable right and left breaks with predictable structure. Water temperature stays between 26 and 29 degrees Celsius year-round. The best swell window runs April through October. For surfers at the intermediate to advanced level, it checks almost every practical box. Punta Roca, a few kilometers up the coast near La Libertad, carries a different reputation. It's discussed in professional surf circuits as one of the best right-hand point breaks in Central America. Long, fast, tubular under the right swell conditions, breaking over a reef that rewards people who know exactly what they're doing. It shows up in international surf competition discussions and in the kind of travel conversations that happen between people who have actually surfed it rather than just seen photos. The town itself has developed the infrastructure that follows serious surf destinations without fully losing the low-key character that makes them worth visiting. Bars built directly onto the beach, hammocks between palms, budget guest houses that cost a fraction of comparable spots in Costa Rica. A growing population of long-term foreign residents, Americans, Europeans, Brazilians, who arrived to surf and never found a reason to leave. El Salvador's coast has over 300 kilometers of Pacific shoreline. Most of it hasn't been commercially developed yet, which is either a problem or the entire point, depending on what you're looking for.
Number 5. Puente Mango, El Salvador surf spot, the secret right-hand wave only dedicated surfers find. Puente Mango exists at the end of a road that makes most rental cars regret the decision. Located in the eastern department of Morazan, close to the Honduran border, it requires navigating unpaved tracks through terrain that becomes genuinely impassable during heavy rain. There's no hotel chain at the destination, no reliable Wi-Fi, no smoothie bars. What there is at the end of that road is one of the most technically demanding and consistently rewarding right-hand point breaks in Central America. The wave breaks over a reef that activates properly with a specific swell direction, typically southern ground swells that wrap around the point and produce long, fast sections that hold shape for what feels on a good day like an absurdly long time. On large swells, the wave barrels in sections that require commitment and positioning experience to handle. It's not a beginner wave and doesn't pretend to be. The small surf community that knows it exists treats that honestly as a feature. The beach itself is the kind of place that used to be everywhere in Central America before development caught up with the surf tourism circuit. Basic accommodations run by families from the local community, fishing boats pulled up on the sand in the morning, food cooked to order with whatever came in that day. The economic scale is small and the pace is slow in ways that are increasingly rare.
Puente Mambo's reputation in serious surf circles is well established, even though it appears in mainstream travel media almost never. It circulates through the specific channels where experienced surfers share information about breaks that aren't yet overcrowded. Word of mouth, specialized forums, the recommendations that get passed between people who've actually surfed it. The combination of access difficulty and wave quality has kept it at a scale that works, which is the most fragile kind of perfection a surf spot can have.
Number 6. El Imposible National Park, El Salvador, the forest that almost nobody visits. The name comes from the history. Coffee carriers crossing these mountains on foot in the 19th century named one of the gorges El Imposible after the number of people who fell to their deaths trying to transport cargo across it. The bridge that eventually replaced the dangerous crossing is gone, but the name stuck to the entire national park, which is, in the context of Central American protected areas, both undersized in terms of tourist attention and oversized in terms of what it actually contains. El Imposible covers around 3,800 hectares in the Apaneca Ilamatepe mountain range in southwestern El Salvador, close to the Guatemalan border. It's the country's largest national park and sits within a region identified as one of the biologically richest in all of Mesoamerica. Over 400 tree species, jaguars and pumas in the more remote sections, tapirs, a bird checklist that runs past 300 species, including several that are endemic to this specific mountain range and found nowhere else on Earth. The trails range from manageable day hikes to multi-day routes through primary forest where the canopy is dense enough that you lose the sky for stretches. Waterfalls drop into pools fed by year-round streams. The forest floor is covered with a layer of biological activity, insects, fungi, small reptiles, that signals healthy primary ecosystem rather than the degraded secondary growth that covers most of what gets called forest in Central America. Getting there requires effort. The park is not easily accessible by public transportation, and the roads leading to it are the kind that reward vehicles with actual clearance. That barrier filters most casual visitors, which means the experience inside is genuinely isolated in a way that parks with better infrastructure and worse ecosystems can't offer. El Imposible is the type of place that rewards people who specifically want the forest and are willing to work a little to reach it.
Number 7. La Matanza, El Salvador, 1932. The massacre that erased indigenous identity for decades. In January 1932, indigenous and mestizo peasants in western El Salvador rose up in an armed rebellion driven by land dispossession, brutal labor conditions on coffee plantations, and an economic collapse triggered by the Great Depression, crashing global coffee prices. The uprising was planned with involvement from the communist organizer Agustín Sabundel Martí, though it was poorly coordinated and the government discovered the plan before it could fully execute. What followed the uprising suppression was one of the most consequential acts of state violence in Latin American history. The Salvadoran military and allied civilian paramilitary groups swept through the western departments where the rebellion had occurred. Estimates of the dead in the days and weeks following the suppression range from 10,000 to 40,000 people, most of them indigenous Pipil men who were killed not for proven participation in the uprising, but for being in the area, for looking indigenous, or for being identified by local landowners with personal grudges to settle. The long-term cultural consequence of La Matanza, the slaughter, was as devastating as the immediate death toll. Surviving indigenous communities rapidly abandoned visible markers of their identity. Traditional dress disappeared. The Nahuatl language, spoken by the Pipil for centuries, went into rapid decline as parents stopped teaching it to children. The calculation was survival. Even an environment where looking indigenous had just gotten tens of thousands of people killed, assimilation was rational. El Salvador went from having a significant visibly indigenous population to having almost none within a generation, not because the people disappeared, but because the terror of 1932 made invisibility the only safe option. The suppression of indigenous identity in El Salvador is frequently overlooked in regional discussions that focus more on Guatemala's indigenous populations, but La Matanza explains the specific shape of that erasure with brutal clarity.
Number 8. El Salvador Coffee Land Reform 1881. How Café created the inequality that caused a civil war. El Salvador in the mid-1800s had the soil, altitude, humidity, and average temperature to produce exceptional coffee. Once the commercial potential was recognized, the expansion happened with a speed that had no real precedent in Central American history.
Within decades, highland territories that had supported subsistence farming and cattle ranching were being converted into coffee plantations. The problem was, who owned those lands? Large portions of the best highland terrain in El Salvador belonged to indigenous communities under the ejido system, collective land ownership that had existed since before Spanish colonization, protecting communal agricultural use across generations. In 1881 and 1882, the Salvadoran government passed laws abolishing ejidal titles and communal land rights. The stated rationale was economic modernization. The practical result was that land worked by indigenous communities for generations was legally reassigned to families with the capital to cultivate coffee at commercial scale. The concentration that followed was extreme. The 14 families, actually several dozen elite clans, came to control the majority of El Salvador's best agricultural land. Peasants who lost land access became seasonal agricultural laborers, dependent on coffee harvest cycles for income with no stability between seasons. The wealth gap that opened during this period was one of the sharpest in Latin America. That structural inequality directly produced the 1932 peasant uprising, led by Agustín Farabundo Martí, and the government response known as La Matanza, where between 10,000 and 40,000 people were killed by the military in days. The FMLN guerrilla organization that fought the Civil War 50 years later took its name from Martí. The coffee land reform of 1881 didn't just reshape El Salvador's agriculture, it set in motion a chain of events that ended with 75,000 dead, a generation in exile, and gang networks that still define the country's security challenges today.
Number 9. Bitcoin City, El Salvador volcano. Bukele's plan to build a crypto city powered by lava. In November 2021, standing at a Bitcoin conference in front of an enthusiastic crowd, Nayib Bukele announced that El Salvador would build a city, an entire city, designed around cryptocurrency, powered by volcanic energy, and structured to eliminate almost all forms of taxation. Bitcoin City would be built at the base of the Conchuaga volcano in the eastern part of the country and would use the mountain's geothermal energy to mine Bitcoin at industrial scale while powering all urban infrastructure. The architectural renderings shown at the announcement were ambitious in the literal sense of that word. A circular city that viewed from the air would take the shape of the Bitcoin symbol. The plan included a financial center, residential zones, a commercial district, a port, an airport, and entertainment infrastructure. The tax structure was designed to be maximally attractive to international capital. No income tax, no capital gains tax, no wealth tax, no import duties. The only tax would be VAT, with half going to public services and half servicing the debt used to build the city. Financing would come through Bitcoin bonds, $1 billion in sovereign debt denominated in Bitcoin, marketed to crypto investors worldwide. Half the capital would go towards city infrastructure, the other half toward direct Bitcoin purchases, betting that long-term price appreciation would cover interest and principal payments. The crypto market collapse of 2022 made the bond issuance economically unviable at the originally planned terms. The launch was delayed repeatedly. Construction never advanced beyond symbolic groundbreaking ceremonies. Bitcoin City became quieter in official communications as the political calendar moved on. The episode is still worth taking seriously, not as a success story, but as a data point about what happens when a small country decides to use itself as a testing ground for financial ideas that larger, more cautious governments would never attempt. Audacious, messy, partially failed, and genuinely unprecedented. That combination is its own kind of historical significance.
Number 10. Suchitoto, El Salvador colonial town, the art city that survived war and stayed beautiful. Suchitoto sits at about 500 meters above sea level in the Cuscatlan department, looking out over Lake Suchitlan from a ridge that makes the view from its main plaza one of the better ones in the country. The town is built on the Spanish colonial grid, cobblestone streets, a central church dating from the 18th century, whitewashed facades, and the particular quiet of a place that hasn't been overrun by the kind of development that erases the original character. During the Civil War, Suchitoto was caught directly in the conflict. The FMLN had a strong presence in the region, and fighting displaced much of the population through the 1980s. Many residents who fled never came back. The town that emerged from the war was smaller, but the colonial architecture that remained became the foundation for something unexpected, a genuine art scene built by the people who stayed and the ones who eventually returned.
Today, Suchitoto has galleries, art workshops, a surprisingly strong independent music scene, and a community of local and international artists who have made it a kind of cultural outpost in a region not usually associated with that kind of creative infrastructure. The monthly arts festival draws visitors from San Salvador and from abroad. Artisan crafts in clay and textiles produced in the town and surrounding communities are among the more interesting you'll find in El Salvador. Lake Suchitlan, visible from the town's edge, was created artificially when the Cerrón Grande Dam was built in the 1970s, flooding a valley and creating a 135 square kilometer reservoir. Local fishermen operate on the lake, and boat tours through the islands and inlets have become a low-key tourism draw. The combination of colonial architecture, arts culture, water views, and proximity to San Salvador, about an hour's drive, makes Suchitoto the kind of place that gets recommended by every traveler who accidentally found it.
Number 11. Coatepec Crater Lake, El Salvador. The volcanic caldera with impossible blue water. Coatepec is the kind of place that makes people stop mid-sentence when they see it for the first time. The lake sits inside a volcanic caldera in the Santa Ana department, and the water is that specific shade of blue turquoise that looks like it's been color-corrected in post-production. It hasn't. That color comes from the mineral composition of the water, the depth of the caldera basin, and the way the surrounding mountains create light conditions that hit the surface at angles you don't get on flat terrain. The caldera formed from a series of massive volcanic eruptions around 57,000 years ago, leaving a roughly oval depression that eventually filled with water to produce a lake about 6 kilometers wide. The surrounding mountains rise steeply from the shoreline, creating a microclimate that's noticeably cooler and more humid than the lowlands, which in a country where summer temperatures routinely hit 35 degrees Celsius is not a minor benefit. Access to the water is mostly through private properties on the shoreline, many of which rent kayaks, paddleboards, or simple waterfront areas for the day. There's no public beach in the conventional sense, but the network of small guest houses and lakeside restaurants that has grown around the lake provides a low-key infrastructure that works without being overdeveloped. The aesthetic is somewhere between quiet resort and working fishing community. The villages on the lake's edge still operate traditional fishing operations using small, hand-built boats, and the morning light on the water when the fishing boats go out is genuinely cinematic. Coatepec is about an hour and a half from San Salvador, which makes it viable as a day trip, but interesting enough to justify staying longer. It's the kind of place where people who plan to stay one night end up rebooting their itinerary around.
Number 12. El Mozote Massacre, 1981, the war crime the U.S. government tried to bury. In December 1981, soldiers from the Salvadoran Army's Atlacatal Battalion entered the village of El Mozote in the department of Morazan. Over December 11th and 12th, they killed everyone they found. Men were separated, interrogated, and executed. Women were raped before being killed. Children, over 130 of them, were locked inside a church and killed together. The total death count reached approximately 900 people. El Mozote had roughly 500 permanent residents, but many families from surrounding villages had gathered there specifically because they believed the area would be safe. The village was predominantly evangelical and had no documented history of guerrilla support. None of that made a difference. What turned El Mozote into an internationally known case was what happened afterward. Two journalists, Raymond Bonner of the New York Times and Alma Guillermo Prieto of the Washington Post, reached the area weeks later. Both published detailed reports based on survivor interviews and first-hand observation. The Reagan administration's response was to deny it completely. State Department officials went to Congress and testified that the reports were exaggerated or fabricated. The U.S. Embassy in San Salvador produced dispatches minimizing the events. Bonner was eventually pulled from Central American coverage under pressure from conservative media. The denial held for over a decade, until 1992, when a forensic team arrived at the end of the Civil War and found bones. Hundreds of them, including children, in a mass grave at El Mozote. The 1981 reports were accurate. El Mozote became a symbol not just of Salvadoran Civil War atrocities, but of how governments deny documented war crimes when geopolitical convenience demands it, and how long those denials can hold even against physical evidence.
Number 13. Joya de Seren, the Mayan village buried alive under volcanic ash in 590 AD. In 1976, a construction worker operating a bulldozer near San Juan Opico hit something unexpected underground.
preserved adobe walls with a level of detail nobody had ever seen in Central America. What followed was one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the entire Western Hemisphere. Underneath the soil was a complete Mayan village, frozen in time by a volcanic eruption around 590 AD, sealed under meters of ash for over 1,400 years. Joya de Seren got called the Pompeii of the Americas, and the comparison holds up. Just like the Roman city was locked in a single moment by Vesuvius, this Mayan village was captured mid-routine. Excavations revealed homes with furniture still in place, food storage containers still holding grain, a communal sauna, a ball court, and communal spaces that paint an extraordinarily clear picture of what ordinary Mayan daily life actually looked like. Not royal life, not temple ceremonies, but the farmer's house, the kitchen, the neighborhood. The most surprising detail is what wasn't found: human skeletons. The village was abandoned in a hurry, but in an organized way. Researchers believe the tremors that preceded the eruption gave people enough warning to run. What they left behind is a complete archaeological snapshot that no palace or pyramid can match, because civilizations tend to preserve monuments, not the homes of regular people. UNESCO declared Joya de Seren a World Heritage Site in 1993. It sits less than an hour from San Salvador. Most travelers heading to El Salvador don't even know it exists, which means you can walk over 1,400-year-old structures in complete silence without another tourist in sight, which is an experience most famous archaeological sites in the world stopped offering decades ago.
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.